Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you from the Colonial Dungeon, this is the Court-Martail Podcast! Introducing your host for this evening, he has a bald spot on the top of his head, and he weighs in tonight at a number you don't need to know. He is the Colonial Loudmouth, Sean McCarty!
And welcome to another spectacular edition of the Court-Martail Podcast, the only place you could find it right here on the Court-Martail Podcast channel. My name is, as always, your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty, and we have a lot to talk about today. It is going to be just me today, but that is not to say that we will not be having guests coming up. And what I want to start with today is just a little update on future programming, just so you all know what's going on and you're all up to speed. I am following through on what I did this Tuesday and now having watch-alongs on all Tuesdays of every match of the week that I'm going to be doing from here on out. It's just been a great time being able to talk with you on the chats, and for us to watch the matches together and then be able to comment on them later on what my final thoughts were. And of course we did that. This is the first week that I did that. I was joined by Josh again, and now we're going to hear about that a little bit later for the match of the week. So that's going to be continuing on as a new thing. We are going to be doing Tuesday live streams. We also have an update on next week, because apparently this Saturday is All Out. And I was hesitant about reviewing an AEW show, but I feel like considering that we absolutely eviscerated SummerSlam, we can only do the same next week for All Out. So I am going to watch All Out. I am going to have a guest. I'm not sure which one quite yet, or who I'm going to have in as my co-host for that discussion. I know who's going to ask, or assume that he is, but in any event, we're going to be doing that, so that's going to be next week. And then of course the week after that, we're going to be doing our ACPW versus NWL fourth week, the mid-season pay-per-view, at least what I call the pay-per-view, the Harvest Havoc for ACPW. NWL has the Hart Foundation Cup, which is going to be another great section there. And then the last week in September, I'm going to do something fun, I think, and I don't know if I'm going to replace it as instead of doing a podcast, or if I'm going to be doing it at a separate time, but I want to do a watch-along live stream pay-per-view, but I don't want to do Clash of Champions. I want to do a pay-per-view maybe on YouTube already in the same format that we're doing. I was thinking maybe we could do the Night of Legends, or the Legends of Wrestling show, the infamous Legends of Wrestling show. Maybe there might be something else of Herb Abrams' program we might be able to find, or just a full-on pay-per-view. We're going to find it on YouTube. We're going to watch it all together. So stay tuned for all of that, because we've got a lot coming up on the Court-Martail Podcast. It's a very exciting time to be a part of what we do. And of course, if you like what we do, don't forget to give that like, share, subscribe, hit the bell button, all that stuff. I hate doing this as a preface to the show, but I wanted to get that out of the way because we've got so much to talk about. And because we're going to be watching All Out, I'm going to give my thoughts now on the current state of All Elite Wrestling. AEW, to me, has been a very interesting watch. Both in watching the shows and watching the movement of the program, as how it's progressed both in booking and in business moves, and how the vice presidents have managed to believe their own hype probably more than most people would give them credit for. You know, you even hear Jericho defending it. It became what was, at least I suspected, going to be something different of a program as far as an alternative to WWE. You know, something that was going to be a little bit more, I thought was going to have a little bit more of a serious edge to it, but I should have known based on the guys who were promoted to executive vice president spots, what we actually get. And really, AEW has got a few really golden wrestlers, has got some good talent in it, but the booking is so mishmashed and misunderstood and makes no sense in the grand scheme of how the finishes work and who goes over and who doesn't and the kind of storytelling they do. It's just, there's certain people who are in charge of their own stuff, which you can tell they are, and it's a much better as a result. And then there's it's such a mixed board with AEW, because you've got older guys who are really trying to do right by the younger guys, but working with them and trying to teach them better, like Dustin Rhodes. You've got people like Jericho who believe that he's one of the cool kids now, and as a result, because he's doing all the stuff that they do instead of bringing them up to his level, because a lot of the guys, you have to admit, when AEW first launched, their talent pool was not that good. It took some major signings, and at least in I believe, between Jake and Lance Archer, who they flummoxed by feeding to Cody, and Brian Cage, who they flummoxed by feeding to Jon Moxley. And Brody Lee, I don't know how I feel about Brody Lee. Like, to some extent, I like him, but to some extent, I thought his promos would be better. And just really haven't done it for me. But also the Dark Order. Let's talk about the Dark Order. That is such a crappy gimmick with two guys who I just don't really like. I don't really see the appeal of Evil Uno at all. I don't think that they're that good. I like Stu Grayson. I like Grayson a lot, and that's the old school guy in me. I just don't see anything in Evil Uno, and it's little things like he's supposed to be like this feared demonic heel. You know, he's supposed to be the feared demonic cult guy, but then he's doing like arrogant, like brash babyface moves, and he was very large. He's not as large now. But it's just, me personally, I think that they could have gotten so much better in their talent pool with the kind of resources they had. But I also think that Tony Khan is a big part of that, because he likes the kind of wrestling that the Young Bucks and Omega and Cody and Paige are putting out. You know, and I don't think Paige has that role. I think Paige is just a squire, just a page. But when it first came out, right, when the first rumors of AEW were going on, there was so much mystique around it. We were super excited. I was super excited. I was thinking we were going to get something different, something that was going to have some old school style to it, but have some new age stuff too to boot, which, in all fairness, it does. But some of the new stuff, it's just, what they're showing isn't so much that the moves themselves are bad, because a lot of the times they're not. They're executed well, like, but to me, they do think they do way too much for way too long, and nothing has any meaning anymore. And I mean that in the sense of the moves. It's because you see a Canadian Destroyer pretty much every show, practically at this point. You see all these high-flying gymnastics, which I'm not saying that gymnastics aren't fun to watch. It's just that there's to some extent, you know, I'm always about the old school storytelling, the actual clear heels, clear baby faces. And that's another part of it too. It's like the guy who seemed to do the best was Cody, because he knew how to work people and how to be a good baby face and to shine, you know, and to get heat, you know. And now I think he's turning heel. That's my suspicion with Cody, but he was the one who knew what he was doing. His match with Jericho was great. His match with Dustin was, to this point, the best match that they have ever put together in AEW history. Was that match between Cody and Dustin. The Archer match with him and Cody, I mean, it was still good. It just, I didn't think that Cody should have won it. There's been some certain stuff. MJF has been the big shining star of AEW, and not selling real estate at that either. Although he is on a campaign now, and I'm not sure I like this campaign, MJF. his promos are gold. I mean, everything he says is terrific. But I don't know if I like the campaigning thing. I know it's like a hot button topic, and people are doing the whole campaigning stuff because it's 2020 and it's an election year. To me, it's just a little stagey. It's a little WWE-esque as far as, like, to me, if I was going to get an alternative, I want to see old school. I'd like to see old school territory style wrestling. That's why I liked the NWA until Lagana's spinelessness ruined it for me. And because the NWA had that kind of feel. It had the, here's the clear heel, here's the clear baby face. You're working hard, you're getting over, and really, in that small few months' time, all of those wrestlers' stocks improved, I think, as they were really building a massive audience. It's a shame that the NWA ended up the way it did, with Dave Lagana being a spineless man who also had evidence of whatever speaking out he was accused of. He basically just straight out admitted and then sold NWA. What a dirty deal from to happen with NWA like that. And that was the kind of alternative I was looking for, which incidentally came at the same time that AEW started coming around, which is why I was immediately Team NWA until once again Dave Lagana's spinelessness proved to be his undoing, which ended up losing them a ton of viewership. Particularly speaking about the Cornette incident and its impact and the way that was taken, the ridiculousness of the way that was taken. But getting back to AEW, I thought that we were going to get a little bit more of the old school clear heel, clear baby face, and it looked that way at the start. In between Michael Nakazawa and Alex Jabali, with the pool stuff and the Legos and the guy taking a thong out and baby oil and that's kind of what immediately did it for me. In my personal preferences of wrestling, I would rather suspend my disbelief that these two people are mad and want to fight each other and would want to beat the piss out of each other. I don't care if it's just punches and kicks and some body slams. I'd rather see that over 74 Hurricanrana moonsault destroyers off the table onto the apron, which is the hardest part of the ring. That's my personal preference. I admit that is a personal preference. However, what I was hoping that AEW would do is that at least to some degree, because I know that kayfabe has long since been far gone, I would have liked to, for some degree, AEW to adhere to that, especially because they were trying with some matches and not with others. So it's like either fully commit to doing the serious stuff or fully commit to being a joke show. And unfortunately, I think they kind of went more towards the latter than they did the former. Because Matt Hardy came along, and my big controversy with Matt Hardy is he should not have kept a broken gimmick. It obviously did not work in AEW's audience because it was just stale. It had gone south. You couldn't ride that forever, Matt. And I love Matt, and I knew that he would kind of revamp himself, and he's now doing that again. I think he's actually got a matchup this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. I might be. I do not know the card. I will be full-fledged. I'll be dead honest with you because I kind of like being surprised by the card with AEW, and I'll look it up when we actually do the show, and obviously because I'll be watching the show. But I guess my final thought here in AEW is that you see the progression here. They've had some ridiculous BS from the start. They tuned some of those people down and raised some of those people back up. They still got people, like, I don't care for Joey Janela. I like having some decent look about you. I like the Lucha Brothers. I wish the Lucha Brothers would adhere to more tag team mechanics, but I like what the Lucha Brothers do. I just think that I like Pentagon better as Pentagon and Phoenix better as Phoenix, rather than having the two of them as a unit. Because I feel like both of their identities are diluted by doing that. You know, and you know, that was the big thing about Pentagon. We mentioned it when Simon Lee was here. We were talking about Pentagon just being so vital for Lucha Underground based on the promos he cut. You know, I think we're losing the value, and that's been my biggest problem with AEW, is that we're losing the value of the talent because we don't know how to present the talent. But anyway, it's time to move on, and I'm excited to see what's going to go on in at All Out, because I'm going to keep an open mind. You know, I'd like to keep an open mind with WWE, but they have beaten me into submission in that respect. And as a result, we're just going to move on to another kind of... it's a good segue for this, because this whole cartoonish wrestling, because I mentioned my personal preference of I'd rather be suspended disbelief that people are mad and want to be in a fight, as opposed to the high school theater, the community theater stuff that we get with both WWE and AEW, which is also another infuriating thing. I feel like AEW just became WWE, but lighter. You know, it's another full of garbage, hyper cartoony. It's all fake, so let's just piss in each other's mouths and jack off in a circle production. And that's not what I was looking for or hoping for, and that's why I was so disappointed in AEW. And I think AEW's hype has really kind of subsided in the year since. You know, it's not nearly at the level that it was, or actually, I should rephrase that. It's in the exact same place that it was, which is 3/4 of the problem. They're not bringing anybody in. They're not bringing anybody new to see this product at all, and that's really hurting their credibility. It's been a year, and they haven't garnered anything. They've gotten the exact same group who's always going to watch wrestling all the time for all the universe, no matter what they say and what they do. It's like their brand of loyalists, but they're not bringing anyone in. They're not bringing any casual fans in. They're not trying to redeem any sort of reputation that wrestling once had, which now it's completely in the absolute toilet. And I think that was my thing. That was like, this had so much potential, and it ended up just being another comedy show, which is so disappointing because there's a lot of talent in that company that don't deserve that. But I'm going to keep an open mind going into this show. But then I talk about the state of wrestling today, you know, with all the flips and the not caring about the rules and the not listening to the older generation, or not caring or thinking their stuff is better or whatever. It's like, who's the blame for this style of wrestling, right? Who's really responsible for bringing us where we are? You know, with the lowest amount of people that have watched wrestling in wrestling history, the fact that it's the same group of people at the same time, all in the same place, and decreasing by the day, as shown by WWE's most recent spats, or continuous spats. But who do you point the finger at? You know, because there's nothing better than pointing a finger at somebody to blame them instead of yourself for something that you've done. So I want to be able to help the pro wrestling business do what the pro wrestling does best, and scapegoat and blame and cause people strain and duress. But who is to blame? Because really, wrestling is in the worst shape it's ever been in, and I know that that's not a popular thing to say to wrestling fans anymore, because wrestling fans try to defend the business, and they're like, oh well, it's not the way it used to be. Like, it's evolved and it's gotten so much better. I'm like, it really hasn't, because you got the same amount of people doing the same amount of shady stuff. The only thing that's different is that the actual art of wrestling is lost due to hyper gymnastics, because spot shows became more of the instant gratification than the actual storytelling, which was the art. And nothing's one take anymore. There's so much hyperactive. And hyperactive is a really good word to put it. It's hyperactive. Everything has to be done all the time in all perpetuity. The matches are too long. There's people doing way too much that they're not doing to isolate themselves. You're getting the moves over and not the person. People don't seem to care about the old school style of storytelling because they think they're little high school click moves that were popular in the 90s, that are just, the remakes just aren't doing it. The remakes with the shittier casts are just not doing it. It's just, that's the way that it just turns out to be. And honestly, I think a lot of the blame has to go to Vince McMahon. I mean, I hate to be that guy who's like, oh, Vince McMahon is the root of all problems, blah, blah, blah. Which he's not. You know, I'm going to name a few names here that I think share a responsibility, because I want us all to acknowledge why wrestling's in the shape it's in. Vince McMahon has, obviously a hell of a lot to do with that by cartoonizing wrestling in a way that, not only just made it just too over the top, it was too cartoony. There was PGing wrestling was really one of the downfalls of wrestling. And I mean that in the sense that, I'm not talking that you need blood all the time, stuff like that, but the fact that no one can be mad at each other anymore. No one can fight each other. No one can wrestle for a belt. God forbid that wrestlers wrestle. You're not even wrestlers anymore. God forbid wrestlers wrestle for a belt. You can't say that in WWE, that wrestlers wrestle for a belt. That is a taboo sentence in the WWE, and that is exactly the type of BS that WWE has indoctrinated into over a generation of wrestlers and wrestling fans, which is why I think a lot of this has come to pass. The fact that WWE was the only game in town for so long left people no choice but to watch the super hyper cartoony wrestling, so they didn't know anything different than what Vince McMahon had been given. And this is coming from a guy who started watching WWF tapes when I was 4 years old, and I was a WWF guy from the start. But I now am in a different position because I've been able to go back and watch all this old school wrestling, which is one of the perks of Vince trying to make wrestling now, make WWE the Netflix of pro wrestling, which I think is a great idea if he had all the territory material. But he's never going to get the licensing for all of that. As much as he'd like to try, he'll never get all the licensing for it. But, so that's part of it. Vince's brand of wrestling being on top for so long, especially after WCW folded. And WCW's ultimate downfall was Jim Herd. I'm going that far. Jim Herd trying to cartoonize WCW to a crowd that was just not receptive to that, which made, like turning Ric Flair into Spartacus. Or the Ding Dongs, or stuff that was just, it was sports entertainment stuff that didn't belong in WCW. And the more that happened, the more, and then Bischoff comes into the picture, and Bischoff goes, well, I will continue what Jim Herd started, but better. So let me get let me get Turner's money and his checkbook, and let's buy out all these sports entertainment guys that Vince put on top of the world. And then what we had in the 90s was not two wrestling companies going at it. It was two sports entertainment companies that had some good wrestling on the program. And that's what made Vince kind of turn into more, a little more aggressive on that. But that also leads me to another man I would like to put on the blame pedestal. But I'm not going to blame him in the way that people probably think. I got to put some weight on Vince Russo's shoulders here. Now, I have never felt, and I will talk about Vince Russo in depth on another day. I have never felt that Vince Russo has ever done anything in the business maliciously. I don't think that he ever did anything with the intent of hurting the wrestling business. I think that Vince truly believed that that's what wrestling should be, is just cartoony, Jerry Springer-esque, Crash TV, just making it lowbrow. I mean, Vince had already exposed the business at this point in multiple ways, between the getting out of the, we mentioned it several times. We have our whole series of kayfabe breakers that we're discussing. But really, another thing to kind of put the knife in the coffin, nail in the coffin, put the knife in the coffin too, that really stabbed wrestling in the demonic heart that it had, was a lot of that Crash TV garbage. A lot of that lowbrow, this is just insult comedy and the birth to the hand and the some of the ridiculous undercard stuff. What was it? Was it Test had to tattoo Albert's ass or something like that? There was so much of it, but I think Russo, in that sense, in destroying wrestling, what remained of wrestling's credibility after kayfabe had been broken, definitely deserves at least some credit for what the shape of wrestling it's in. And also because a lot of those wrestling talent grew up on the Attitude Era, and as a result, know most and we're excited the most about Vince Russo's booking, which is, in part, why we've got wrestling executive vice presidents who are doing, in my opinion, equally as offensive things, if not more so, than what Vince Russo was doing in the 90s, which, you know, you look at some of that WCW stuff and you're like, oh, how? But really, look at AEW sometimes. Look at WWE sometimes. They both do it. They're both a victim of what Russo started. The transition from booker to TV writer was such a huge, monumental paradigm shift in the way that wrestling was presented, and that's a big part of it, was Vince Russo being the one saying, hey, I've got ideas, and Vince giving him a shot. You know, and then the success of the talent that was on that roster at the time between Triple H and Undertaker and Kane and Austin and The Rock, and, you know, obviously Austin and The Rock as far as the big drawing, you know, the big draws. But I guess the final thought I have about the state, well, at least about Vince, is that, like, what Vince did was pave the way for openings like what we've got now in the state of wrestling and people defending that kind of wrestling. And I'm not knocking the guy at all. It's just, this is just, at least from my perspective, what has led to this moment. And there's no denying that there is a lot of Vince Russo influence in today's modern presentation. And that's not a knock, it's just a fact. And that is, you know, it's something that I personally do not like. I'm hurt by, disappointed by, upset about even. But for somebody who didn't ever mean wrong by the wrestling business, I cannot instinctively get mad at Vince Russo. Because I don't think that Russo ever wanted to be somebody who was bringing the wrestling business down. And he didn't. And truthfully, he didn't until he was left to his own devices. You know, I think that once Vince got his own way, that's when things went down the wayside. And instead of using that as a cautionary tale, people have embraced that style of booking, which is not Vince Russo's fault. It's just what has happened. And, you know, and I think the third part of this, and the third major, like, finger to point at, is really the internet. The internet itself has really caused everybody to be able to know everything about everything at a moment's notice. It's very hard to keep a secret nowadays, period. Because of technology and because of the internet. And really, when you think about it, the only reason that you're listening to me, a random smark, somebody who used to be a fan, who is now a critic, I suppose, of the wrestling business, but still loves wrestling, still a devout wrestling fan. The only reason you're listening to me now is that we've got companies that have diverted their attention so far from them, and there's so many options to listen to what everybody's take on it is. It's like we've had the accessibility to do this kind of thing, so that's why I'm here. So I can't blame the internet, but I'm blaming the internet because it became a lot harder to conceal the kind of secrets that wrestling requires. Because, which was a big part of it, was fooling people, but that was the art of it. And, you know, even the ones who knew liked the suspension of disbelief, which is just, we just don't get nowadays. Because we can't, because it's this. You know, because it's turned into, not only does it turn into sports entertainment, but because technology has pretty much dismantled the secrets that we could have kept, but now can no longer. And, you know, it's, and then I guess the final piece is all of us. Because you have to admit that between Vince being the only game in town and Vince kind of revising history and being, you know, indoctrinating a lot of us into his narrative of pro wrestling. And between the internet, where you can scour dozens of wrestling interviews and get a different perspective on things, I think the fact that there's so much wrestling knowledge out there and people talking about wrestling and the accessibility to it is expanded. What we've become is a big part of why wrestling is in the shape it's in. I mean, because we all think now, more so than ever, that we know what we're talking about. And I have long since stated from the very beginning that I don't have a goddamn clue what I'm talking about as far as the in-ring stuff or trying to see things. You know, Jim Cornette's podcast being such a big hit, you know, and him talking about the insides of the business, that makes you think you can understand more of the insides of the business. You know, but we're also at a point where I think the fans think that they can do better than the people doing it. Which is, you know, kind of a Russo mind of thinking, because that was the whole problem to begin with. You know, so we've all become this wrestling journalist or wrestling critic in our minds now. The type of fans that we've become have really hurt, I think, wrestling, because a lot of casual fans don't want to go to a wrestling show and be like, oh, that Rey Mysterio, who's a good heel, MJF, he's no good, isn't he? Somebody better beat him up. And then the guy next to him going, actually, MJF is the most talented man on the show. He's better than anybody else. Like, I loved MJF. He's so good. But, oh my God, did you see Tony Khan? Tony Khan booked him to lose to Jon Moxley. At least I think. And it's just, the booking is atrocious. And then, God, look at this guy. You know, it's like, there's no casual conversation like, the guys in the fans in the audience, instead of going to enjoy the show like heels and baby faces, which they don't present, are there to critique, which is the whole basis of my channel. And I know I'm knocking the entire basis of my channel, but the fact remains that were it not for our attitude of we know what we're talking about and we know better because of the internet and because how kayfabe has been broken and how it's been so deliberately thrown out the window, we now believe that we are authority figures of some description. And because of and Dave Meltzer, forgot to add Dave Meltzer. That was a big part of why wrestling is in the shape it's in, because Dave Meltzer has enabled this kind of thing in fans, I think, because of his success and the way that he's made his money. And again, if you want to hear my rant on Dave Meltzer, you got to go back all the way to the relaunch back in March, and we will talk about Dave probably more in the future. But Dave Meltzer, you know, his style and what he's done, and him not really ever having been in the ring. I mean, he's a great historian, but is now, you know, full-fledged, just full in on something else, and you know, that kind of journalism of things, you know, having that insider tip, and then enabling of things like this and this podcast and other podcasts like it, to the point where now nobody can really enjoy full-fledged wrestling anymore because there's so much hyper-criticism surrounding it. You know, and it's one of the only businesses, the only industries where that is the case. You know, it's one of the few industries where there's so many podcasts about people, but the people who are in the business use us as the measuring point to continue or to stop what they're doing, but they don't stop, and it's a mess. So we have to take our own responsibility here. And what can we do as wrestling fans to help improve the business? And I'm not saying we should have a lighter tone, because if the wrestling sucks, the wrestling sucks. You know, that's half the fun of complaining about it. I don't have an answer. But I have successfully pointed fingers at a few different places that I think have led to why we are where we are. And some of it for better, a lot of it for worse. But in any event, we still have fun doing what we do. And that's what matters, I suppose. And with that said, it is time. Oh, you know what time it is. Everybody here knows what time it is. Hit that intro, future me.
What time is it?
It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's the night, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the babyface cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week. That's right, everybody. It is our match of the week. Now, we all got to see this together. So if you didn't get the chance, then I highly recommend you go back to my live streams, which you can find on the tab, and I will have a link to this in the description of the live stream of me watching this match, but we will still talk about it in its entirety. It is Bullet Bob, or just the Bullet in this case, because we didn't know it was Bob Armstrong at the time. Bob Armstrong versus Ron Fuller. I cannot tell you when this was. It was not dated. I have to imagine that this was sometime in the 80s. Maybe 85, maybe 86. It was in Continental. I can think as Continental went down in 86, so it was in the 80s. That's all. That's as much as I can go. Bullet Bob versus Ron Fuller. Gordon Soley, the only man on commentary who had some level of power, which I can't even really describe. This match was really not much of a match. There were some body slams. Bullet Bob shined, did really well, got some good offense in on Ron Fuller. Ron Fuller cut him off with very sharp elbows. And even in the thing that was so apparent in this match was the body language. It was so well put together as far as, like, you could tell who was the baby face. He's shucking and jiving around, you know, as the Bullet. He does the knees thing. He's ramping up people. He's getting, he's dancing. He's having a good time, but he's ready to go throw down. Look at his physique. And then you see the cocky strut by Tennessee stud Ron Fuller, and you see the big bravado, the I'm better than you, and the robe and all of that. You immediately know who's heel, who's babyface, and that is something so missing in pro wrestling today, and that's something that I wish would come back to pro wrestling today. So we go in, and of course, Bullet Bob gets the jump on Ron Fuller, who is 6'9", by the way. Holy Christ, this is a big dude, who is balding, but he's a big dude. And Bullet Bob is so not that frame. He's got a huge physique, strong as an ox, but he's significantly smaller, but he sees him going he's throwing around, and of course a body slam in the robe. A great little move there. Ron Fuller, he's selling really well, takes the robe off, gets some shots, gets hit, boom, boom, boom. And then finally, Ron Fuller cuts him off, gets a few very sharp elbows going down, but then Bullet Bob makes a comeback, hits him in the figure four. Bullet Bob doing a figure four. And the whole angle of this match was that they were trying to expose that the Bullet was Bob Armstrong, helping out Brad, and Brian, I think, was there as well, if I'm not mistaken, but at least Brad. But I think the whole Armstrong family was there. Well, anyway, so this whole cavalcade of heels comes to help Ron Fuller. A lot of the Fullers come in. I forget everybody. I should write down these names when they happen. But there's a whole cavalcade of heels come in and beat down Bullet Bob, and they're about to expose the mask, and the Armstrongs come in, and then it just deteriorates to an all-out brawl. I mean, it is just a complete all-out brawl. Fighting back and forth through the arena. It's like a 10-on-10. And then in the 10-on-10, the lights go out just as they pull out Bullet Bob's mask, and then the lights come back on, and the heels have been rushed away, and Bullet Bob has his mask back on, so nobody actually got to see Bullet's identity, even though it was Bullet Bob, and everybody knew it was Bullet Bob, but they still kept the identity because they just loved Bullet Bob so much, and the crowd was a huge pop because they didn't get to see it. The Fullers go up, and apparently the logic behind it was Gordon Soley was in charge of, like, telling the people to go to a commercial or to cut to black or whatever it was. So they cut to black, and then the lights came back on. So, like, the Fullers had a gripe against Gordon Soley because they're like, well, Gordon, you're the one who made the call. And I guess there were some previous things that were going on, like Gordon Soley had done stuff like this before. Of course, babyface announcer, kind of the one guiding the whole show. So he was obviously trying to play the straight man and being like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, they just didn't get a chance to see it. The Fullers cut a pretty large promo, and then Bullet Bob takes the mic and just starts going in on Ron Fuller and says any one of the Fullers versus me. Loser leaves town, and then there's a little bit of a break, and then they come back. One of the guys, I think his name was Boomer, accepted. The loser leaves, and then there's more promos between the two, and that's pretty much it. Again, this was way more angled and match, but boy, it was a bit of a jumbled mess. I mean, for those who were just kind of watching it in a vacuum like I was, very weird. Like, it would look like an overbooked mass of confusion, which really it was. But I think it all came together decently enough to where you kind of you were still invested in watching the next part. You know, I kind of wanted to see Bullet Bob play that Loser Leaves Town between the Fullers and the Armstrongs. You know, it's old school storytelling, but it goes to show that overbooking can happen in any generation, and I feel like this angle kind of suffered from that. But in any event, it served its purpose. It got people excited to see a new match. They booked a new match. They were getting it signed for the next week. And then there was a nice little cameo from Mr. Wrestling 2, who also said, Bullet Bob, I know it's you, Bob Armstrong, and I'm going to pull your mask off because I'm Mr. Wrestling 2, in only the way Mr. Wrestling 2 can. So, all in all, again, this was more of an angle than a match. So this, we should have called this Angle of the Week, but we didn't want to get sued by Kurt, obviously. And if you've watched his Instagram, he's doing this milk challenge where he dropped a basketball and then got the milk and just chugged the milk. We don't want to get on his bad side. But speaking of people you wouldn't want to get on his bad side, but something I got to talk about tonight. Bullet Bob just recently passed away at the age of, I think, 80, after a long battle with prostate cancer and other cancers in multiple places. A father of 4 different wrestlers, and he was at 4 wrestlers who all made a name in some description. You know, some not as famous as others, but Road Dogg from WWE, and this is kind of what I'm talking about WWE's history being like such the narrative. But Road Dogg, Brian James, son of Bullet Bob, Brad Armstrong, who unfortunately passed away, I want to say of a car accident, but maybe a heart attack. Do not quote me. That is what the internet is for. You can find that information. I do not want to spread misinformation because that would not be right of me as a podcaster trying to give you the best. But Bullet Bob had a career. He started in the 60s. And the more that I heard the promos and how genuinely babyface this guy was, how in all of everything he did, he was just the upstanding father who was doing right. He was a good wrestler. He worked out hard. He was just a good old American boy, American man, raised his family, and his family became a good family of wrestlers. You know, it's like, I don't know how to put it. It's like he's a guy who lived what every upstanding American would want, you know, honed his craft, became great at it, raised a family who all came into the family business, you know, made a lot of money, had a loving wife, and then unfortunately cancer took him away. But he lived, and his gimmick was that of the true upstanding man. He only turned heel once, very briefly, and it didn't go over well because that's why he was just such an outstanding babyface. His work was solid. From every video I've been able to scrounge together on YouTube of Bullet Bob, you know, everything he did was crisp. He didn't hurt anybody. He had a arm wrestling match in TNA against Conan at 66 years old because, of course it's TNA, so they like to do those cameo appearances, but still, he looked great. You know, he still had massive guns and of course won, but of course an arm wrestling contest in the middle of a wrestling ring. So, who knows how authentic that was, because of course they had to hype up the drama and all that. But still, but the point being, Bullet Bob, I mean, Jim Cornette, I've listened to Jim Cornette's whole tribute. He's super broken, not incredibly broken up the way he was with Lance Russell, but he's broken up about it. He's a guy who another one of these wrestlers that I wish that I'd gotten to know prior to him dying. You know, I wish I'd been able to find more footage of him and what he was able to do. And And I'm sure I'll have to continue to scour YouTube because it's just a shame that somebody like that could be nearly lapped generationally. And there was a tribute to Bullet Bob and on WWE's YouTube page, and I got so disheartened and felt kind of guilty, actually, because it was all the way through. It was like, oh, I didn't know who he was, but he looked like a legend. Oh, I never heard of him before. I never knew this. I just knew he was Road Dogg's dad. Blah blah blah. Like, it was just comment after comment of just not knowing one of the true pioneers, wrestling family pioneers. You know, he was a top guy in a lot of places. You know, he was a major name. He was a major name that I think had been lost by the generational part, and that's another big, you know, my issue with Vince-isms and the whole Vince being able to rewrite history is that you don't hear about Bullet Bob in the same regard and the same enthusiasm as you do a Bobo Brazil or a Bruno Sammartino. And I understand Sammartino is in a different league, but still, like, but the point being, it's like you don't get those people as glorified. Like, I love Bullet Bob's thing with Roddy Piper, how upstanding he felt with Roddy Piper, and those two in the same place. Bullet Bob cut a hell of a promo. You know, every promo I've seen of him has been solid. When he needs to get fired up, he gets fired up. When he doesn't, he doesn't. And he's just an all-around good dude. A great man with a great family. And he's a guy who I really wish I had been able to get more of in my body and more of in my brain before his untimely passing, which, of course, the cancer, which is I could do a whole promo on cancer, but I'm not doing a promo on cancer, but I will say that as a tribute to Bullet Bob, I do very much want to thank him for his contributions, even though I was too late to the game to witness most of them. And I wish that I had been able to be there to see them. And thank you for the talent you left behind, the legacy you've left behind, the work that you left behind. To be in a business for 6 decades. He was wrestling probably like 3 months prior to him passing away. I forget his last match, but it was pretty recent. You know, he was working out apparently until last month. You know, it's something. It's something. This guy was clearly one of the best that didn't get the recognition past a certain generational point that he should have. And I hope that more people will go in and watch him in the same way that we were talking about Kamala. And I hope I don't have to do another one of these before the year ends. I'm hoping that's it. But rest in peace, Bullet Bob. I'll miss you. I'm really looking forward to catching up with you as far as your entertainment is concerned. I'm looking forward to catching up and really getting to know you as an athlete and as a competitor. And thank you for everything you've done. And with that said, it is time to take our first commercial break. When we come back, we're going to have an all-out review, ladies and gentlemen. But we are also going to have a match of the week. So stay tuned on Tuesday for the stream. We are going to have a match of the week, at least on the stream there, which the link will be in the description. We won't review it on the podcast because we're going to do the review instead. But you will still be seeing me on Tuesday. Thank you very much for watching, and we will be right back after these messages.